Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining. We're going to give everybody a few more minutes here to log on before we get started. So if you'll just hang with us tight, we'll be starting in a second. All right, it looks like attendees have just about finished trickling in here to the Zoom call. So first of all, thank you everybody for joining. My name is Josh Fuller and I'm an associate at Thompson and Horton here in Dallas. And we are very lucky to be joined here today by two policy experts working with the Texas legislature down in Austin. Historically, this CLE has involved elected officials, and we opted to go for a different route this year. Trying to get the nitty-gritty details from the most recent 87th legislative session from two people who were up close and personal. We're joined here today by Tamoria Jones, who you might notice is in a car right now. She is being an incredible sport, joining us here today. She currently serves as the Chief of Staff to Representative Harold Dutton Jr., and she's also the Committee Director for the Texas House Committee on Public Education. In 2020, Tamoria briefly left Representative Dutton to accept the position of Vice President of Government and Regulatory Affairs for the Texas Public Charter School Association. She returned to work for Representative Dutton when he was appointed Chair of the House Committee on Public Education for this session. During her first session, she worked on a lot of important legislation that she believes provides a great and quality education for over 5.2 million Texas students. So she's doing incredible work down there in Austin. She's a native of Freeport, Texas. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Marketing, an MBA from Texas Women's, and she's also a lawyer, a graduate of Thurgood Marshall School of Law at Texas Southern University. We are also lucky to be joined here today by Daniel Warner, who is a policy advisor for higher education and public education to Speaker Dade Phelan. Previously, Daniel served as a senior public policy analyst for Senator Larry Taylor, covering various issues including the state budget and tax policy, education, and higher education. He began working at the Capitol over 8 years ago for Senator Jane Nelson in 2013. He's worked for multiple Senate committees, including Finance, Higher Education, and the Select Committee on Property Tax Reform. Daniel is a graduate of the University of Texas at Austin, Hookham, with a Bachelor of Arts in Government, and he's also an active alumni member of the International Fraternity Zeta Beta Tau. So thank you both so much for joining us here today. It means a lot that you're here. The remainder of the time, we're just going to talk about bills, legislation, kind of what's been going on the past 140 days in Austin, stuff that will affect us not only as Texas citizens, but mostly as lawyers or our practice of law. And hopefully at the end, we will leave enough time to get to some questions and answer, which you can submit at the bottom through the Zoom call. And Sherry Harris will be providing a CLE course number information for us. So first of all, Daniel, let's kick us off. When did this session start and end?
Oh God, it feels like years ago at this point, but it was, I think, January 10th, 12th. It's a total 140 days every other year. And my understanding, and I am not a native Texan, but I'm here now, is that when the Texas Constitution had to be resubmitted to U.S. Congress after the construction era, it was the Texas intent to meet as little as often, and this was the bare minimum they could get by with meeting with the state legislature meeting. So it was a rough 140 days. Considering the first 60 days, you really can't do anything. There's a constitutional prohibition on bills coming on either floor unless you have you waive the rules, or it's an administrative, or unless it's an emergency item by the governor. But it was a long, hard fought 140 days.
Yeah, to try and get everything done 140 days out of every 2 years, that definitely seems like you're trying to jam pack everything in as much as possible. Kind of tell us about, where both houses stood as far as representative makeup, if you can, between Republicans and Democrats in the House and the Senate.
So I think it was 83 Republicans and 67 Democrats coming into session, or maybe it was 82 Republicans because there was a vacancy when session started. But that contest was definitely a solid RC. And that was in the House, and in the Senate it was 18-13, which flipped one seat into going into this election.
Got it. And
Yeah.
so now that we're finished with the legislative session, we're going to keep track, I guess, of how many of those bills that get passed are actually going to get signed by Governor Abbott. Tamoria, how long does Governor Abbott have to act on the bills that are going to be sent to his desk for signature?
Yeah, so June 20th so he can either veto the bills, he can sign them, or he can just let them pass without his signature.
Great. Is there anything special about that June 20th date?
Sorry, you said, is there anything special about that date?
Right.
Yeah, so yeah, that's the day, all the bills come into law.
Right. So that's correct me if I'm wrong, Tamoria, but the Constitution says the governor has 20 days upon a regular legislative session to veto or not veto legislation.
Correct. So after the 20th, that he can't act on any bills.
Right. Including the state budget.
Correct.
We'll be keeping our eyes open, I guess, for the next 11 days or so to see what does get signed or doesn't. And in terms of the number of bills passed and brought to the floor this session, kind of tell us, where did this session compare to other recent legislative sessions?
Yeah, so this session, because of the pandemic, I think a lot of people thought that members wasn't going to file that many bills. Also because we also just didn't know what the session was going to look like because of the pandemic. But actually it wasn't that very different. This session, there was about almost 10,000 bills filed, about roughly like 9,900. And almost 3,000 of them have been sent to the governor. Compared to last session, there was almost 11,000 with about almost 5,000 going to the governor. So I just think, like, even during the pandemic, members did not shy away from still filing the high number of bills that we saw in previous sessions.
I guess that's good to hear, and it'll keep you guys busy for sure. Well, I think that was a great introduction to what the legislative session looked like and how busy you guys were. So let's jump into talking about some of the substantive legislation, either that is on Governor Abbott's desk or that has recently been signed. We'll start off with a bill that has a little bit to do with criminal justice, but most everyone knows it as constitutional carry. That's House Bill 1927. First of all, right now, what's the status of that bill? Is that law already?
No, so that bill has been sent to the governor's desk, and so we will know either sooner than later or on June 20th, whether or not Texas will become the next constitutional carry state.
Got it. And Governor Abbott has signaled that I think he's going to sign this bill. And once it's law, what's going to be the big effect on gun owners and gun ownership?
So the biggest effect is like you will no longer need a license in Texas to in order to carry a permit. That's really much the biggest one. However, it would still be beneficial for people to have a license, like for when they travel to other states. And then I will say the other biggest change is for individuals who have been prior convicted for unlawful carry of possession, they can apply for an expunction if the bill is passed.
Okay, so it does have some criminal justice consequences as far as prior convictions, hopefully getting expunged there. In terms of where Texas fits in with the other 49 states passing laws, that have been deemed constitutional carry, where do we fit in the grand scheme of things?
So we will be joined by other mostly red states. There are a few other states that have constitutional carry, like Arkansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, South Dakota, and Tennessee.
I think also Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire also have it.
Yeah, so we'll be joined by the other red states that you see that has Republican leadership. We will be joining them in terms of constitutional carry.
And just like, and most people might probably know this, but this doesn't affect, right now under current law, you can carry a long gun in public, no questions asked. So this only relates to, correct Tamoria, on weapons that would have previously needed a permit for a handgun license.
Correct.
Yeah.
Great, well, thank you guys. And so I guess, well, Daniel, you kind of just alluded to it, but
Yeah.
Can anybody over the age of 21 after Governor Abbott signs this bill just walk around with a firearm wherever he or she wants?
So I guess
No.
no, right. So you can get 18 years old, you can get a long gun. So you could be 18 and get a long gun, but you also, when you go purchase a weapon, you still have to go through the federal background process. So any kind of still presenting your ID and making sure that you are eligible under federal law and state law to receive a handgun, you still comply with those standards.
Correct. And you still won't be able to carry that isn't going to change under this law.
And I think, Tamoria, you alluded to it just a little bit ago, but if someone currently has a license and you're no longer going to need one under HB 1927, does that license still serve any purpose?
Yes, it does. So like when you're traveling or you're going to like another state that does not have constitutional carry, that's when your license will come into effect.
Okay, well, there you go. The big picture. Just about anybody can walk around with a gun. That's going to be the future in Texas, but by no means are we the first state to do that. Another really important criminal justice bill that has passed the House and has been sent to Governor Abbott's desk is HB 929. That is being called the Botham Jean Act. And that was named, of course, after Botham Jean, the Dallas resident who was tragically shot and killed in his apartment by a Dallas police officer. And I think we've all seen how important body-worn cameras can be in capturing footage based on other high-profile encounters with law enforcement around the country. And this bill aims to clarify policies and procedures related to body-worn cameras by law enforcement officers. So I'll throw it up to either one of you. What's one of the major changes this bill would make if it becomes law?
So one of the major changes is policies developed by law enforcement agencies. They have to, for those who have receive a grant for the body camera, they have to actively keep their camera on during the entire investigation, unless the camera has been deactivated in compliance with current policy that that particular law enforcement agency has.
Okay, so chances are the body worn cameras now, they have to be running longer, and the discretion to deactivate them is decreased for law enforcement officers. Daniel, any other notable changes that the Botham Jean Act is going to make?
I think it allowed for non-confrontational, so you'd be able to turn it off for non-confrontational, but now it has to keep running, I believe. So things like that. And if it's like, if you're just out and about, I think you can turn it off. So a little more clarity under it, and just basically saying what it should be used for and what it shouldn't be used for. And I think after this past, 2 years, a year and a half of it feels like such a long time ago, but I guess just a year of unrest in this country, this was something that I think a lot of people also agreed to, and it was pretty I think close to unanimous passage in the House. I think it was, so not 100%, but still over 100 votes. So for us, usually when you kind of figure out how well someone's doing on a policy position, over 100 is usually your barometer, I think, in the Texas House of how well we're doing.
Good. I think it's an important bill to pass, and it sounds like it's gotten a lot of support. It's not going to apply to every law enforcement agency in Texas, if I understand the bill correctly. Is that right?
Right. I think Tamoria mentioned, I think it only applies to those that receive the grant from the state to purchase the equipment. And I think it also includes all DPS troopers. So any statewide, any DPS, anything like that, I think it also includes them. I'm not 100%, but I think it includes that.
Correct. Yes, it only applies to those laws. Yeah, and I think another notable mention to for this bill that this bill was drafted by the Associated Sheriffs. And so, and I think that's just really important to know in particular about this bill, because a bill such as this.
Agreed. Yeah, when you've got law enforcement helping you draft a bill that will obviously affect law enforcement, that shows that there's a lot of support behind that bill. One other kind of criminal justice bill that seemed notable to me when we were planning on what to talk about today is HB 4293. That relates to the creation of a court reminder program for criminal defendants. What specifically is this bill going to do?
So this will essentially, the Office of Court Administration of the Texas judicial system, they will develop like a text reminder program that will text all individuals who have a court appearance. It will text them essentially a reminder as to their court date, the time, and what court they have to appear before.
Well, that sounds good to me. It sounds like we should definitely be taking advantage of that kind of technology in 2021. Daniel, anything else notable to you about this bill?
No, I mean, there's certainly, I think I was on the floor when there was a conversation between some conservative members, and they're like, how do you not know, that kind of thing. But, I think it's good. I definitely think that it kind of addresses more of our bail reform system, and kind of how do we help people, how do we deter as many people behind bars as possible, and showing them for court dates and having as few warrants out for their arrest as possible. I think this is part of it. Do I think that there will be some people that will get a text message and never respond to it. Absolutely. And do I think that there's some people who knowingly will get the text message and ignore it? Absolutely. I just really hope that it helps, those who really need it. And I'm very interested to see, what to take, if there's any data around it after this goes into effect, how many people actually were reminded, and if that's even, discussed in court proceedings, like, oh yeah, I didn't show up. I wouldn't have shown up because I didn't forgot about it, but I got my text like a dental reminder, to show up to court. So I think it'll be interesting to see whether it's working or, if this is just a pat myself on the back, I passed the law kind of thing. So it'll be interesting.
Agreed, definitely. Moving on, let's talk about some of the specific COVID-19 related legislation that the legislature considered. Obviously, there's a lot going on and a lot that can be addressed. Probably, well, at least most recently, it seems, is the Senate Bill 968, which deals with COVID-19 or vaccine passports. And that's the idea that you would have to prove you've been vaccinated against COVID-19 to participate in something or to go somewhere. And it seems Governor Abbott just dealt a huge blow to private businesses being able to require vaccinations against COVID-19. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
This was something I think that he was very adamant about back in April when everyone started to get their vaccination cards and say that, yes, we're open for business. I do think that there's some exemptions of just not showing proof, but still allow businesses to mitigate whatever kind of COVID-19 spread that they think that they're doing. But it seems like the governor has put himself in a position where he is trying to be out in front of certain constituencies, if you will. And I think that this is something that he is passionate about. I don't know why, but it seems that he's passionate about it.
Right. And yeah, I think you make a good point. When he first came out in opposition to the notion of a COVID-19 passport or vaccine passport, this is probably something we all could have seen coming down the pipeline for quite a while. But government entities, as I understand, are still 100% across the board banned from requiring vaccine passports. Is that right?
I believe so.
Correct.
Yes.
And then the consequences, at least in the private sector, is that you could lose a license if your business requires one to operate, or you could be denied a state contract.
Correct.
So here we are, a very pro-business community.
If vaccine passports aren't going to be allowed to catch on in Texas, what kind of options do businesses still have as far as combating the virus and making sure that their customers or clients are healthy and safe?
Well, I also think that, businesses are still allowed to enforce masks and say you're not welcome here without a mask. And so that is their, private business right. I think that the governor, his personal standpoint is, or Senator Kolkhorst and Representative Click, I think their idea, or really Senator Click, was no one should be able to prove their health status to conduct business, whatever it is. I think that's their individual liberty versus, whatever standpoint. But I think that, businesses can still control occupancy. They can still control whether they're closed at all. And so I think that's what they're able to do. But I think it comes down to a person having to tell what their health status is to gain entry into a private business.
Well, that's good to know. I think that's important for anybody, joining us today who advises business clients. This is really, I think, like you just said, Daniel, it's about being forced to prove that you've been vaccinated, that you've, received a vaccine. But by no means is this going to restrict anybody from any kind of screening or infection control protocols. This is really all just about, have you been vaccinated, and do I have to show you proof of
right?
that?
And I mean, even to go not in so when we were up here during the legislative session, we had two basically tents that looked like you were in, like out of a movie, basically in a almost like a containment facility that you went in and people had to get tested if you wanted to come in and go to either into the Senate chamber or to Senate committee. So you had to have proof of vaccination or proof of a negative COVID-19 result to go in. The House didn't have that policy. It was encouraged, but there would be offices, in both in the Senate and the House that said, we wanted you to be tested before coming into our office or a committee hearing room. And so just one of those things that people were very opinionated about and had things, what we knew in January, and then you kind of saw throughout the evolution of session was that, all right, this hasn't become an outbreak. People, we relaxed mask mandate policies here in the building and in offices and on each, in each chamber. So it was moving. And I think that from where we were on May 31st to where we were on June 12th, COVID definitely changed the way that we did business here.
Got it. Thank you so much for that. Senate Bill 6 relates to COVID-19 lawsuits. It's legislation that's still awaiting the governor's signature, and it deals with being able to sue certain individuals or businesses. How would you summarize the COVID-19 related lawsuit bill, Senate Bill 6?
So this will applies to a physician or a healthcare provider or first responder. And so under this legislation, individuals would not be liable for an injury, including economic or non-economic damages and or death that arose from like care, treatment, or failure to provide care or treatment related or impacted by the pandemic or a disaster declaration, if there's a showing of like certain evidence. And then so they'd have to show, essentially you'd have to show that a pandemic or disaster declaration related to a pandemic disease was a treatment or failure to provide care or treatment that allegedly caused the injury or death.
Got it.
Yeah, but also alternatively, they could also show that the individual who suffered the injury or death was diagnosed or reasonably suspected to be infected with a disease at the time of the care or treatment. So it really just kind of limits who you can sue as a result of, obtaining, a disease.
Great. So for all of our healthcare lawyers out there, if you represent physicians, healthcare providers, first responders, anybody in the medical field, this is going to be a bill that you're going to want to keep your eye on if you didn't already have it there, because this is going to directly affect your clients and whether they can get sued. It's now going to be amending, it looks like, the Texas Civil Practice and Remedies Code. All right.
Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just saying, like, I think I particularly personally wasn't surprised when this bill came out, because you saw a lot of individuals questioning, like, if I go to work and I catch it, because of, a coworker, or you saw it with like teachers not wanting to know, like, if I have to go back to school or work, like, how would that play out? And so I think this bill kind of addresses those concerns.
And right, and just to add to that, it also affects preschool, pre-K all the way through institutions of higher ed. So to provide that, and that was the biggest concern I think that we dealt with during the pandemic, was teachers didn't want to go back to school. And so then you had this cascading effect of teachers not going back, students having to work, virtual, all kind of stuff. That kind of said, well, now what? Because then the school districts were like, well, we're not going to force our teachers to come back, because what if they sue us? So it was a not a pleasant time.
You guys had a great segue right there as we bring up teachers and schools. Let's get into one of the one of the bills making more of the headlines recently, House Bill 3979. I know both of your policy portfolios are in education and higher education, so I will just turn the floor over to you guys. Tell us a little bit about House Bill 3979 in terms of what we've likely heard in the news, and then maybe some of the other, minutia in the bill that we're not aware of.
This bill was a doozy, to say the least. I didn't know where this bill came from or like why we needed this bill. But the more that this bill was publicized, you see that this is a topic that a lot of states around, the states are taking on and trying to address. Daniel.
Yeah, so I mean, there was a discussion. I think that there was actually an election up in a school board election at South Lake ISD that occurred, I guess, in May, and this was central to that election about what had happened and we're seeing in the news all the time whether teachers should be teaching certain things. And I think going back to criminal justice reform and going from a year ago, there were instances in Texas public schools where parents found out that teachers were teaching certain things and they were pretty frustrated about it. And there was really nothing that they could do to stop it or to teach another side. The final bill was one of the most interesting things I've ever seen in parliamentary procedure. It had gone over to the House, to the Senate. It was a House bill, basically listing out all these different things you had to include. And it was a pretty exhaustive list, from all kinds of backgrounds, from Harriet Tubman, what was the newspaper, whatever it was, and kind of talking about everything, every amendment to Tocqueville, everything. Then it went over to the Senate. Then it came back and they basically gutted the bill and really took some amendments that had some bipartisan support over here, just kind of, which amendments need to be spoken about. But that really wasn't the heart of it. The heart of it was the next section, which has to deal with what teachers can say and what they can't say. And so unfortunately, there have been instances in the state where certain races were better than other races, or that's what was being taught, not necessarily that was the truth. And parents were getting pretty pissed about it. And so legislators heard it and they said, we got to do something to fix it. So that bill comes back over to from the Senate to the House, and the plan was to concur with the Senate amendments. And they added an entire new section of bill, basically requiring TEA to create a training program for teachers to be able to help teach what the new TEKS, or the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, outline the curriculum basically. And it wasn't germane, it wouldn't apply to House rules. So that bill went down. And so it gets sent back, and the whole dramatic finishing unfolds. And it was like 3 a.m., I think, when the Senate took it up. And it was about, whether you can retreat or not. And so the bill that left the House floor was the bill that became law, which I think for a lot of people was a little more, it felt a little more easy about it, just because they stripped a whole bunch of stuff, including certain, Chicano movement, Texas Mexican history, things like that the House Senate took out. And so I know the author of the bill, when he saw it coming back, he was pretty upset. And so it was one of those things. But, I think that this is one of the issues that are becoming more and more prevalent. Not saying I agree with it or not, but that's how the members felt. And that was the play that was run.
Yeah, and interesting enough, just on that topic, that there was another bill in our committee that just dealt with teaching. Currently right now, in the TEKS, we have positive character traits that must be taught. And so there was a bill that would essentially, teach diversity and inclusion. It would add that to one of the positive and character traits. And that bill was fine, but I think when working on that bill with another member, it ended up dying because of, one of, the member that was, helping on that bill started tweeting out, about, white people have a superiority and they have this white privilege. And it just became a point of contention. And so ultimately, like, a bill that was just aiming to teach kids about diversity and inclusion ended up having to die because of this contention. And so you do kind of see that is a hot button issue with certain members. And so as a result, it's something that we all had to deal with. And that bill was very one of the most interesting debates, both in our committee and on the floor.
Got it. Well, it sounds like you guys had quite a time dealing with House Bill 3979. And Daniel, I think you underscored the point that, all politics is local. If something started out as a debate at a local school board and has now transformed into a movement of, how are we going to control what teachers teach or don't teach? It's something that we're definitely going to want to keep our eyes on, especially if you've got kids in Texas public state schools. There was another interesting House bill that talked about kind of the more patriotic education side of things, being proud of being a Texan. That's House Bill 2497, which I think was signed yesterday, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I've been trying to prepare for this presentation for quite a while, and it's just having to be constantly updated, which is the fun in following the legislature and politics. Texas students, are already required to take social studies and history courses in Texas history in middle school. What kind of changes does House Bill 2497 have in the way that Texas students are going to learn about Texas history?
So it also created the Texas 1836 project. So even though this bill, it went to state affairs, not really sure why, but that's okay. I ended up having to pick it up over here. And Texas being Texas, wanted everyone to make sure that everyone knew how Texas became Texas, and very prominent, and just, what exactly happens. And so just I guess just a better Texas history course, and the principles on how Texas became Texas, and how we're still, operating under a very similar legislature that, happened back, maybe not in 1836, but we're still operating very similar to that today.
Yeah, and I think this one didn't cause too much of a hiccup like 3979, because I think that it included everything. And I think from my standpoint, just kind of working in different arenas, I think it is important for people to know about Texas history. I was talking to an organization, and it was a little bit after the George Floyd situation happened, and they were working on an agenda. And one of the things, about how they can be more inclusive, and one of the things they had on there was like, we need to make Juneteenth a state holiday. And I had to be like, it's already a state holiday, right? But they thought because, it's not recognized in some other states. And so I think that's why this bill didn't give people heartburn like 3979 did, because it included everything from learning about Juneteenth to, Mexican history, Hispanic history, and Texas and the founding principles. And so I think that's important for everyone to at least have a basic knowledge on.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. If you're talking about some of the more broad-based historical principles and individuals, then you're going to get more public support for that. We're not talking about just affecting school students here, though, right? Who else is this? And this is kind of funny, doing a little bit of research into it. Where is this really going to come in, particularly if you're new to the state of Texas?
You're gonna see this at your DPS office.
Yeah. If you move from another state to Texas, and you apply for a driver's license, you are going to get a nice pamphlet on Texas history.
Fantastic. Indoctrinate them from the beginning.
Right.
And then, Tamoria, you talked about people weren't nearly as opposed to this bill as 3979. But as far as opposition to this bill, how would you characterize that, and what are some of the issues that people are looking at?
I guess it's always just it's subjective as to like who's teaching the subject. I think that's probably one of the concerns, because like I may have an opinion on something and Daniel has an opinion, and so we just kind of have to be careful. We have the State Board of Education, how they kind of formulate this into the teaks, and so I think if anything that would be probably the most opposition, is making sure that it's taught accurately and correctly, and it doesn't come off one-sided.
Daniel, anything to add there about why people could be opposed, or what kind of opposition?
I think the only thing is that when it creates the commission, the appointees are the governor, lieutenant governor, and speaker. But this is something that I feel that Texas historically, let me say historically, done a pretty good job having diversity on these commissions, things like that. Realize that, whether it's the Genocide and Holocaust Commission, whatever it might be, we do a pretty good job, considering that these are permanent until it's not permanent, but they're appointments until an opening occurs, whether it's speaker, lieutenant governor saying you're no longer on it, or reappointing you, or you're no longer in office. That's the only, I think, point of consternation that someone might have an opinion about. But again, my understanding is that it's more of an advisory role, and just to make sure that everything's being implemented like the legislature wanted it to do.
Great. Moving on, let's talk about the event that really rocked the middle of the legislative session, and frankly, pretty much all of Texas, and that was the February winter storm. It affected so many people, and everybody was looking for a legislative fix to the numerous problems that became apparent and that people were probably learning about for the first time. I didn't know what ERCOT was before February. And so what we got, and that was just signed, I think, either like earlier today or yesterday. Yesterday, again.
Yesterday.
So much for preparing for this. SB2 and SB3. So let's start out with number 2. What does SB2 do as far as energy and utilities regulation?
So SB2 essentially changes how the board members of so it gives more control to governor, lieutenant governor, and have prior there were 16 members, and now added an extra over sums up SB2. And that was crucial because, during Winter Storm Uri, like you said, Josh, I think for a lot of us, no one knew what ERCOT was, that they even existed, what did they do, and then you also saw a lot of members upset that once, more information came out, that majority of them, if not all of them, didn't live in Texas. I think one board member didn't even live in the United States. And so it was just trying to bring, more oversight and local people to overseeing ERCOT Storm Uri doesn't happen again.
I think that's something hopefully we can all get behind, and more accountability and oversight of a vital part of the energy and utilities space in Texas, especially after February, is going to be hugely important. Daniel, what about SB3? That doesn't deal with ERCOT as much. Talk about how that's going to affect energy and utilities in Texas, if you could.
So part of it also, as part of SB3, it really did with winterization, and I have we have plenty of friends who lobby for, whether you're a generator, a utility provider, or anywhere in natural gas, anything like that. And so when you go to winterize something, it also has to be able to withstand 120, 120 degrees out in West Texas, so it also doesn't burn up in the middle of the summer. So, and that requires I think it's a gold plating you have to use to get it done. But it required PUC, I guess, and our PUC to make rules preventing lengthy rolling blackouts. So here in Austin, when we got it, it was like, oh yeah, it'll be a rolling blackout, and that was like a 3 something in the morning, and then we didn't have it for 5 days, whatever it was. It issues fines for utilities that are not prepared to severe weather events. It does create a statewide power outage alert system that utilities can react to outages quicker. I think that was the issue also, is that you have these smaller natural gas providers during what happened, and we hear this number that now $9,000 per megawatt hour, and that's what the cap was at a certain time. And as it went up, that's the only reason that these smaller natural gas providers became online, because it wasn't worth it for them to come online at an earlier stage. So, it also made changes to the membership of PUC. So before it was 3, and I believe it changes it to 5 now, just with more oversight and having people who are really well versed in the area. And basically, it created the Texas Electrical Supply Chain Security and Mapping Committee, and just basically better prepare us going forward. So, PUC, just believe it or not, doesn't just do electricity. It regulates all of telecommunications, water rates, everything like that. So they have a much larger plate that they'll need to address coming up.
Got it. And obviously in politics, you're probably never going to get everything you want into a bill. These were huge bills to begin with, but can you talk about a little bit about what these bills don't do, maybe where they fell short and where people are still criticizing the pieces that were left out?
So I think part of it was it didn't create a deadline for winterization. And I think that part of it was PUC knows much better, and we're not back here for another 2 years. So we don't really know what that looks like, and PUC as actually the regulatory body. So they could issue fines, but as everyone says, well, the fine is just basically something that they'll be in their profits anyway. And it also did not, people were talking, the lieutenant governor believed that there was a massive pricing issue during a certain point. This really did not address any of that, because then you had outside entities like the New York Stock Exchange saying, well, we're going to downgrade your credit because you're going to go in and reprice the market. And that was something that this House was very adamant about, was that we're not doing any repricing because it could affect the credit of the state. And that was something that was important to members here. Not saying that there shouldn't be avenues for energy companies to access a certain line of credit. I think there was another bill, 4492 or something like that, that did create some kind of credit or something like that. Basically, I think tapping the ESF, I'm not sure, but there was some stuff, but it was I think people wanted direct payments to ratepayers for the high bills. I live in a regulated market, so that didn't happen to me. And so there was some stuff that really changed the way that variable rates work and legislation like that. But I think that people were expecting a check at the end of the day, and that's what happens. You live in Texas and you live in an unregulated market, and so all bets are off. All
right, and let's moving on from that, let's end on a little bit of a lighter note, and we'll talk about House Bill 1024 deals with restaurants and hospitality. I have a feeling this could be everyone's new favorite law. It's been dubbed the to-go alcohol law. Take us back a little bit, hopefully not too far back, but how did we get to this point?
We got to this point because, during the pandemic, you saw, restaurants not being able to go at full capacity. And so one of the things that Governor Abbott allowed was the sale of like alcohol to go, right? And so you could get your food to go, and then you could, and so that was something that a lot of people liked. And I think it also helped a lot of restaurants during, probably one of the hardest times we've seen in a while to our economy. And so because it was so popular, and I think the rollout, was really good. It was something that I think no matter what side of the aisle you fell on, like that was something like you supported, and we all saw like it helped. It helped a lot of, especially like the small business restaurants. And so, Texas being a pro-business state, Abbott was like, let's keep this going. And so, and that's what we saw.
And I will add, even for better news, Tamoria's boss had a bill that would allow, if you were a registered guest, correct me if I'm wrong, Tamoria, a registered guest at a hotel, you may drink at the hotel bar. What was it? At 24 hours, right?
Yeah, at any time. And the backstory and the interesting thing is like he filed this bill back in 2003, I believe, and it didn't pass. And so, so if you are a registered guest at the hotel wants to, then you can, they can serve you alcohol 24 hours a day. And if you notice in a thing, he called it bringing a mini bar downstairs. Because if, for those hotels who have a mini bar in their room, you're able to drink all night in your room. Well, why not, extend that to the hotel bar? So, and that way we can help, continue boosting the economy and helping these businesses. And in addition to that,
Oh, this is the best part. Oh, Tamora, you're breaking up a little bit.
And the amendment was added on the Senate side. So now an amendment was added on, you will be able.
Oh man, she's killing it. Basically,
if not vetoed by the governor, you and him instead of.
Yeah, so now you'll be able to buy wine and beer on Sundays at 10 a.m. and not noon.
All right. Well, it sounds like that is something we can all get behind, and it's good to see that even coming out of tough times, we're coming up with creative solutions to hopefully keep businesses afloat and keep everybody, a little less stressed out, a little less panicked. We're going to have some more legislative sessions, some special sessions coming up, right, guys? We'll leave on this note. When are we going to be back?
Well, so the governor's already told us we'll be back in the fall to draw the legislative maps, congressional maps, and House district maps, Court of Criminal Appeals, State Board of Education, those maps, and then how we're going to spend about $17 billion from the federal government that we have yet to spend. So those two for sure, or especially for sure, probably October, I think end of September, October. We're still waiting on the block data or the very, very fine data from the US Census Bureau to tell us what the data looks like. And then the governor has threatened me and Tamoria's pay as well. So we'll be back hopefully soon to figure that out. But we are hearing the summer maybe. We hope it's the summer so we can go ahead and pass another bill that fixes what he'll line item veto in the budget, including our salary. So that's never good. But I think that he's made it clear it's bail reform, and whatever election bill chooses to move or get filed, or election bills that move and move. My boss speaker has said, I think that it's a better idea for it to be in smaller, kind of more chewable fashion, that you can kind of take each section by section. The tactics probably at the end didn't work out so well, but we'll see. We'll be back.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with Speaker Phelan on breaking the bills up. I think anytime you have a huge bill like that, just like having to digest it all and going through it, and we saw Representative Clardy come out and say that there was some errors in the bill, and so hopefully, this time around it's in parts and it will be hopefully a bipartisan effort for as much as that's worth, but we will see.
All right, well, in between then and now, I hope you guys get some time off and enjoy, because it sounds like you'll be busy back at work in not too long. And of course, you just finished up on a whirlwind 140 days of hard work. So thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be with us and talk with us about what was a very important and consequential 87th legislative session of the Texas legislature. If everybody were here in person, I'm sure we'd all give you a big round of applause. So thank you again. Sherry has put the CLE course number in the chat for all of those attending via Zoom. So go ahead and claim your 1 hour of CLE credit. And thank you again so much and have a great day.
You bet. Thank
Thank
you.
you.